My name is Brooke, and I am 34 years old. The private event room at the Lexington Club holds 160 people when you arrange the tables the way my father wanted them. And every seat was filled the night he celebrated 40 years of Harland construction. 40 years of contracts and handshakes and crews spread across every commercial project worth naming in the Ashfield, Ohio metro area. There were city planners at those tables. There were commercial developers, longtime clients, a state senator I recognized from the local news, distant relatives who appeared at family milestones the way people appear at estate sales, curious and slightly predatory. My father had spent 4 decades collecting these people, and tonight he had arranged them all in one room to watch him take a bow. I had flown in from Portland the night before. My husband Adrian sat beside me in the charcoal suit I'd always liked on him, his hand resting near mine on the table in that quiet way he had, the way that meant he was paying attention without making it visible. I had worn a navy dress I bought specifically for this occasion, and I remember noticing that detail later, the fact that I had planned what to wear, that I had thought about how I would look in this room, as if I had known somewhere underneath everything that the room would be looking. My father built Harland Construction from 2 pickup trucks and a line of credit from a credit union. I want to be clear about that because the story I'm telling is not about whether he worked hard or whether the company was real. It was real. He was genuinely talented in the way that certain men are, the kind who shook hands and remembered names and made every client feel like the only client. That was real. What was also real, and what I spent many years trying to argue myself out of acknowledging, was that he had decided sometime during my childhood, quietly at first and then with increasing certainty, that my brother was the future of the company. That I was someone who might stand in the photograph, but had never quite earned her place in the frame. My brother is 4 years older than me. He joined Harland Construction at 23. He was good at the business side, I will say that too, but by the time I graduated from Ohio State with my architecture degree, my father had already started calling him his partner, and the word carried a weight that made it clear it was not a title available to me. I joined the company anyway, because I believed that work would speak for itself, and that patience was just the price of proving yourself in a family where you had something to prove. I stayed 6 years. I drafted plans that other people signed. I watched ideas I had developed get folded into projects that bore my brother's name, and I told myself to wait, to be patient, to give it time. The thing that finally made it impossible was not any single argument or single moment. It was a Tuesday morning in my 6th year when I presented a proposal I had spent 4 months developing. A mixed-use waterfront development on a site in downtown Ashfield, the kind of project that could have been a signature piece for the company. My father looked at it for 3 minutes. Then he said, "Your brother's team is already working on something for that site." He wasn't cruel about it. He said it the way you say there's no more coffee, as a simple fact, requiring no further discussion. I resigned 2 months later and moved to Portland and opened my own practice, and I did not look back, because the looking back was the part that hurt. My husband came with me. He runs a civil engineering consulting firm and has never once, in 8 years of marriage, asked me to be smaller so someone else could feel larger. My father came to our wedding and gave a toast that spent 4 of its 7 minutes discussing Adrian's firm, not because he was proud of him exactly, but because a consulting firm was something he could calculate. What I did, designing buildings, running a practice, building a business from nothing the same way he had, was harder for my father to quantify and therefore harder for him to value. I had stopped trying to make him see it differently. So I want you to understand the kind of tired I brought to that anniversary dinner. Not the fresh, electric kind of hurt. The old, settled kind, the kind you carry until it stops feeling like pain and starts feeling like the particular weight of something you have decided to live with. I had made a version of peace with the version of my father I was going to get. I had told myself I was there, because 40 years is 40 years, and there are things you show up for, even when showing up costs you something. Adrian's hand found mine under the table when the speeches began. My brother sat at the head table beside my father, his wife next to him, their 3 kids at a nearby table in matching outfits. The picture my father had always wanted projected to the world. Legacy, continuity, the name carried forward by the right hands. My father cleared his throat and the room went quiet, the way rooms always did for him. Immediately, without effort, out of a respect that had been earned so long ago it had become reflexive. He thanked his staff. He thanked his clients. He made a joke about his back and got the laugh he was looking for. Then he raised his glass, and his voice changed into the register he used when he wanted something to be remembered. He talked about legacy, about what it means to build something that outlasts you, about clarity, the kind some people have from the very beginning, the understanding of what they are meant for. He looked at my brother and said that some children know from childhood where they belong, and that kind of certainty is a gift that cannot be taught. The room applauded. My brother ducked his head like he was being modest. My father let the moment settle, and then he turned and looked directly at me. The applause was still fading when his eyes found mine, and something in his expression, settled, deliberate, unbothered, told me what was coming before the words arrived. He said, "Brooke chose her own path, years ago. We respect that here." He paused. The room nodded along, not yet understanding. Then his voice stayed even, his gaze stayed on mine, and he said, "But this room is for the people who stayed. I think you know where the door is." 3 seconds of silence followed that felt longer than 3 minutes. A man near the back started to clap, realized no one had joined him, and stopped. My brother's wife covered her mouth. A contractor I had known since I was 12 years old stared at his bread plate. Someone at a nearby table let out a breath that was too short and too sharp to be anything other than shock. I felt the heat move up my neck. I felt the particular focus that comes when your body is trying very hard not to let you cry in public. The narrowing of vision, the clinical attention to small things, the water glass, the seam in the tablecloth, the way the candle flame bent slightly toward the ventilation current. I thought about the 4 months I had spent on the waterfront proposal. I thought about the Tuesday morning. I thought about 6 years of work that left rooms with someone else's name attached to it, and never came back. I set my napkin on the table. I pushed back my chair. I stood up slowly because there was nothing left to stay for. And then I heard the second chair push back from the table. Adrian stood up beside me and buttoned his jacket with 2 slow, deliberate movements that were somehow louder than anything he could have said. The room, which had been bracing for my exit, shifted its attention toward him with visible confusion, because Adrian was not the kind of man anyone expected to make a scene. My father had never taken him seriously, had always treated him as a quiet, capable accessory to my life, rather than a person with his own history, his own competence, his own very specific knowledge of certain things my father did not know he knew. Adrian looked at my father with the expression I had seen him use in meetings where someone was confident and wrong, and he said, in a voice calm enough that every table could hear it without effort, "Before my wife leaves, there's something this room should understand about what it's been celebrating tonight." My father's expression went still. He held the smile in place the way a skilled man holds a smile, like a thing he had learned to control even when it had stopped meaning anything. Adrian said that the centerpiece of Harlan Construction's last 5 years, the Ashfield Gateway development, the mixed-use waterfront complex that had won a regional design award and brought in the largest single contract in the company's 40-year history, had not been designed by my brother. Had not been designed by anyone on my brother's team. The original design, the one the client had selected in the initial proposal, the one that had started every conversation that followed, had been drafted by me, before I left the company, 4 years ago. I watched my brother's face change. The flush started at his cheekbones, his jaw tightened, his hands moved to the edge of the table. Adrian said he had known for over a year. He had stayed quiet because the story was not his to tell, because I had moved forward and built something new, and neither of us had wanted to turn my father's company into a grievance. He said he was saying it now because he would not sit in a room and watch a man point his own daughter toward the door after she had handed him the project he was standing there celebrating. Then Adrian looked at me, just for a moment, and I knew. I reached into my bag. My hands were steadier than I expected them to be. I had kept those files the way you keep a document you never plan to use but can't bring yourself to delete. Insurance against a world that does not always reward the truth on its own timeline. I pulled out my phone and I walked to the presentation screen at the front of the room. I heard the quiet that followed me. Not hostile, not warm, just suspended, 160 people holding their breath to see what I was going to do. I connected to the display. The folder opened. The Ashfield Gateway proposal, original design files, creation date April 14th, 4 years prior, 8 weeks before my resignation. My name in every metadata field, my notes in the margins. I had titled the main document the way I sometimes titled things I thought no one would ever see. Waterfront, last try. I did not raise my voice. I said, "This is the original proposal. The one the Ashfield client selected in their letter of intent. I have that letter, if anyone would like to see it. I also have the email chain from the first site visit, where the client asked who designed the plans, and my brother's project manager responded that the designer was no longer with the company." I looked at the room, not at my father, not at my brother. Just at the 160 people who had come to celebrate a company's legacy. She wasn't gone. She just wasn't there to take the credit. No one spoke. Then a woman at a center table stood up. I recognized her. The principal architect of a firm that had partnered with Harland on 2 major projects. She said, quietly but with precision, that she would like to review those design files in detail, and that she had some questions about the attribution documentation in the award submission. That was the moment the evening stopped being a celebration. My brother stood and tried to say something. Whatever it was dissolved between his intention and the air. He sat back down. My father stood at his podium with the champagne glass still in his hand, and he was looking at me with something I had never seen on him before. Not anger, not the flat, certain dismissal I had learned to read across any distance. Something older and less controlled than any of those. Something that looked, for the first time in 34 years, like a man who might be reconsidering the story he had told himself about his family. I turned off the display. I put my phone back in my bag. Adrian was already beside me, and together we walked toward the same door my father had gestured to 4 minutes earlier. Except now the room had something else to look at. Something that had everything to do with understanding who had actually built what they came to celebrate, and nothing left to do with sending me away. The lobby was marble floors and low light, and the particular quiet of a room adjacent to something significant. The door swung closed behind us, and I let myself breathe all the way down for the first time all evening. Adrian said he was sorry for not telling me sooner, for sitting on it, for thinking it was something I would rather leave undisturbed. I told him he hadn't been wrong. I had wanted to leave it behind. I just hadn't understood, until that moment, that leaving something behind and letting it disappear were not the same thing. We collected our coats. We stepped outside into the November cold, which in Ashfield in November means business, the kind of cold that has stopped making apologies for itself. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment with the night air on my face, and I thought about the building I had designed, whose sightlines I had calculated in a document titled Last Try, whose facade I had argued for in notes no one was supposed to read, whose shape was part of the downtown skyline of the city where I grew up. It was real. It stood on a real corner. People walked past it every day without knowing anything about me, which was fine because I knew and I had always known, and no room full of people pretending otherwise had ever been able to change that. My father called 2 days after we flew home to Portland. I let it go to voicemail. He said he hadn't known the full story. He said he wanted to talk. He said in a voice I hadn't heard from him before, quieter and without its usual certainty, that he hoped I knew he was proud of me in his own way. I listened to the message twice. I did not call back right away, because I have learned that an apology offered at the moment it becomes unavoidable is not quite the same thing as an apology that comes from understanding, and I needed time to determine which one I was holding. Maybe I would call. Maybe someday we would sit across from each other and find something we hadn't been able to find in 34 years. I hadn't closed the door to that. I had just stopped letting the absence of it determine what I thought I was worth. I had always known what I was worth. I had just spent a long time in rooms that required me to doubt it. I didn't need those rooms anymore. I had built my own.